The political leaders square off in the third and final debate as cost of living pressures take centre stage. Consumer sentiment tumbles as interest rates rise, and after 450 million sales over 20 years, Apple is pulling the plug on iPods. It's Thursday, the 12th of May, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
I really look forward to Thursdays, Sean. Do you know why?
Oh, I do know why, but tell the listeners why.
Well, I love Thursdays, Sean, because we have a new episode of Safe Word by Fear and Greed out there, ready to be downloaded. All you have to do is search for Safe Word by Fear and Greed. It's our old Sunday show, isn't it?
It is. It's a sort of less formal look at business, shall we say. Sometimes we talk about business, though.
This week we did. We talked about the need for pay transparency at work, whether you should know about how much your colleagues are earning, whether the cashless society is going too far.
Yes. Yeah, no, we did actually. It was quite business related this week. More so than normal.
That actually sounds like it was quite serious, wasn't it? But I think we take a fairly light-hearted approach to it. After all, it's a podcast called Safe Word, so how serious is it going to be? But anyway, you can find that by searching for Safe Word by Fear and Greed on your podcast platform. Enjoy it. Let us know what you think. And immediately after this show as well, stick around because, Sean, you've got a really... It's a different chat today. You're speaking to Chris Gibbs from American Rare Earths about, surprise, surprise, rare earths.
Yes, American Rare Earths is an ASX-listed company. They operate out of the US, really. They've just had a reasonably big discovery on rare earths over there. Basically I get a 101 on rare earths, and rare earths are not very rare, but they're really difficult to process, and that's the skill in it. And there's high demand in it, mostly because of changes to US government policy. So a really interesting chat to Chris.
Yeah, it sure is. But we've got to get into the main story this morning, and it is all about politics. The two federal leaders, Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese, faced off again last night in the third debate. It wasn't quite as raucous as Sunday night's debate. I think that probably set a fairly low bar, didn't it?
It did. I think it was, a little bit more civilised. Both leaders actually were criticised for their behaviour last Sunday night. I don't know what the electorate think about it, though. I thought it was kind of good to see a bit of passion. Anyway, last night the debate again covered a range of topics, with the Prime Minister focusing on defence and security and the economy. Anthony Albanese focused more on social issues, including childcare and aged care. The cost of living got a really good run as well. It is becoming a major election issue. It is quite difficult, really, for the Prime Minister to defend the increases in the cost of living, notwithstanding many have nothing to do with policy or anything like that. After watching the debate last night and the election campaign so far, it just seems that many people want to vote for Anthony Albanese but aren't really sure that he's up to it. And many don't want to vote for Scott Morrison but fear what happens if they kick him out. The polls certainly favour Labor, and Mr Albanese's party is well ahead of where it was 3 years ago when Bill Shorten lost the unlosable election. But if nothing else, Scott Morrison is a fighter and a very good campaigner.
Yeah, it certainly is. But there was also a fair bit going on yesterday before the debate, especially around the minimum wage.
Yeah, that minimum wage is really getting a lot of airing at the moment. Anthony Albanese's support for a minimum wage increase of 5.1%, which is in line with inflation, has certainly triggered plenty of debate. Mr Morrison called Mr Albanese a loose unit who is making policy on the run in relation to the wage increase, but others, including Western Australia's Labor Premier Mark McGowan, criticised the Prime Minister for attacking someone who supported low-paid people. It was a pretty good retort.
Sean, Scott Morrison calling Anthony Albanese a loose unit. All we need then would be Anthony Albanese to respond calling Scott Morrison old mate Morrison or something like that, and you would have the most Australian election campaign imaginable, isn't it?
We haven't even started talking about Barnaby Joyce yet.
Well, I was about to ask you about him because he is someone to whom the terms loose unit and old mate would just come very, very naturally.
Yes.
And he was at the National Press Club yesterday.
He was. In fact, he got a bleeding nose, literally, in the middle of it. Now, the highlights of his speech, he said the coalition intends to meet the net zero 2050 target. Of course, there's been lots of debate about that within the Nats. He called Labor's housing policy Fidel Castro politics. Don't quite get that one. Mr. Joyce also outlined plans to increase Australia's commercial fleet to bolster supply chains into the country, and he wants to boost jobs in regional Australia. All in all, a pretty busy day yesterday in politics.
Yeah, it certainly was. Now, moving away from politics, what happened on equity markets yesterday?
Well, the S&P ASX 200 closed up 0.2% to 7,065 points, having fallen to a 3-month low on Wednesday, of course. It was anything but a bounce back, with the index falling sharply on opening before crawling back to end in positive territory. There were some pretty decent moves. CSL ended up 2%, Fortescue Metals closed 2.3% higher, Rio Tinto was up 2.6%, while Goodman Group, Aristocrat Leisure, Sonic Healthcare and Cochlear all jumped more than 1%. Overall, healthcare was the best performing sector yesterday. The banks were generally lower, with National Australia Bank going ex-dividend. The financials were easily the worst performers on the day. Telstra was lower, as were a bunch of tech stocks. And Michael, the Aussie dollar remains weak, trading around 69.5 US cents. Some forecasters, including the Commonwealth Bank, think it could fall by another 5 cents if lockdowns in China continue. Why is that? Well, lockdowns means factory closures, which means a drop in demand for Australian commodities like iron ore, which means a lack of demand for the Aussie dollar, which means the dollar depreciates.
Sean, I wanted to ask you about cryptocurrencies, if I could, because cryptocurrency companies have lost a lot of value in recent months, and they really seem to have been some of the hardest hit by the current share market rout.
Yes, that's exactly right. There's a really interesting story in the Financial Review today. Shares in Nasdaq-listed Coinbase Global, which operates a cryptocurrency exchange, one of the big ones, have tumbled more than 70% this year alone and have shed 4/5 of their value since reaching a peak in November last year. Canadian group Hut 8 Mining is another pure play cryptocurrency group. Its share price is down 2/3 this year and 82% from its peak in November. Block, the rebranded payments giant, which was known as Square, which bought local buy now, pay later group Afterpay, has fallen nearly 50% this year. Now, that company provides a range of payments services and 4 years ago began offering trade in Bitcoin through its Cash app. At the same time, the value of cryptocurrencies have fallen as well.
Okay, but why?
Well, the sector's volatile at the best of times, but mostly it's because of rising interest rates and fears about the future. Let's take the last one first. Investors don't want to take as many risks at the moment, and crypto companies represent risk. Also, the era of easy money with ultra-low interest rates is over, so investors are becoming just a bit more rigorous about where they put their cash. Cryptos and companies around cryptos have really lost out as a result.
Yeah, they certainly have. And as always, we are not an investment podcast, so make sure you speak to a professional before making any investment decisions. We will be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, consumer sentiment has tumbled and it's now back to its lowest level in almost 2 years.
Yes, the Westpac Melbourne Institute Index of Consumer Sentiment fell by 6% this month on the back of rising interest rates and cost of living pressures. The survey took place in the week the Reserve Bank lifted the official cash rate. It shows how impactful rate rises are, quite apart from what they do to mortgage repayments. Rate rises impact people's feeling of wealth and confidence, and that flows through to the rest of the economy. Now, of course, it follows upbeat business confidence figures released on Tuesday, though that survey was taken before the rate rise. Certainly, consumer sentiment is on the way down.
Sean, we recently talked about the fact that you were doing some home renovations and you were pretty excited about some economic data that suggested that, hey, there might actually be some more availability from tradies coming up. Now, on the other hand, a bit of bad news for you, Sean. Building Products Group CSR is predicting tradie shortages and supply chain disruptions for another 12 months or so.
Alas, do I believe the Bureau of Statistics statisticians or do I believe CSR, which is a company with people on the ground? I'm going to have to go to CSR on this one. It's kind of good news for CSR, the shortage of tradies, though, because it means demand for its products will stretch out. And the higher demand will allow the group to lift some prices. Chief Executive Julie Coates yesterday said demand in the apartment building market was also starting to gain momentum after an extended slowdown, but labour shortages and supply chain problems mean house building and renovations projects are taking up to 50% longer than usual. We haven't even started. Anyway, she was talking after CSR announced a 24% jump in core profit. Now, CSR products include Gyprock plasterboard, PGH bricks, Monia roofing, those types of things. Its share price ended up 0.5% yesterday.
Okay, now, Sean, this one's a really interesting story. Biotech CSL has had a win in court which might allow for Mexican nationals to give blood in the United States.
I love this story. CSL is essentially a blood collection business. 85% of its revenue comes from blood collection. And it's won an appeal against a US court decision that will now allow plasma companies to challenge Customs and Border Protection's ban on Mexican nationals donating blood plasma. So, CSL has about 15 collection centres in the US within walking distance of the Mexican border. Mexicans with visas could, even during COVID, cross the border, give blood, get paid, and walk home. But that was stopped by this ban. While plasma donations from Mexicans are still unable to restart, the reversal paves the way for a formal injunction and a separate legal process against the ruling. So, all up, CSL gets a lot of blood from Mexicans who cross the border. They haven't been allowed to because of this Customs and Border Protection ban. Now they can challenge that ban. Its share price was up more than 2% yesterday on the news. Just a fascinating sort of business story about how it collects blood.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because you've got then an Australian company challenging US law in court to allow Mexicans to give blood. It's just kind of it's not a story that you would really pick as a fairly kind of standard one. That's just really quite unusual.
It is, definitely.
All right, moving on. GrainCorp, Sean, has announced a record half-year result on the back of strong demand for commodities and pretty favourable planting conditions.
Michael, at least someone is benefiting from all the rain down the East Coast. That's what I say. Look, GrainCorp reported a $140 million jump in pre-tax earnings to $427 million for the half year. The group said global demand for Australian grain, oilseeds and vegetable oils has remained high just when there's been 2 bumper crops in a row down the East Coast. It's a good time to be a farmer.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to say that, isn't it? All right, now Link Group's share price tumbled 15% yesterday morning, Sean, and the ASX asked why.
And the answer from Link was that it didn't really know why there was a dive. The company was forced to pause trading at one point. Link's directors have recommended a $5.50 a share bid by Canadian group Dye and Durham, but after yesterday's fall, its shares are trading closer to about $4.23. Now, it's weird. This deal is almost done. The only thing happening yesterday was an 8% drop in Dye and Durham's share price and speculation that it was having trouble raising money. Certainly there's something going on because investors don't sell at a 20% plus discount if they think the deal's going ahead and they're going to get a lot more money.
Sean, how often does that kind of thing happen where the ASX actually asks a company why there's movement in the price of their shares? Because often there is fluctuation from day to day.
Yeah, they're kind of called speeding tickets, I think. What it is, when they go past a certain level, I don't know off the top of my head what it is, up or down, it just triggers an inquiry from the ASX. Sometimes it's really obvious why that's happened, so the ASX doesn't have to inquire. But on a day like yesterday, where Link's share price fell 15%, Link didn't make any announcement to the market. The ASX steps in and says, okay, this is unusual trading in this group. 15% drop normally never does that, and it hasn't told us anything. So that's when it asks.
All right, interesting. Okay, now fund manager Magellan appointed a new chief executive yesterday.
Yes, these guys have been under fire for a while. David George got the job, replacing Hamish Douglas, who left earlier in the year for health reasons. Mr. George has been with the Future Fund, so he should know all about big investors around town.
And Sean, I'm a little bit surprised by this one. Sales of Red Bull, the energy drink, surged during COVID.
Yes, I've never thought of Red Bull as a stay-at-home sort of drink.
No.
However, even though nightclubs, pubs and bars might have been closed or restricted, Red Bull sales jumped thanks to people buying the beverage at Woolies and Coles primarily. That's according to the Australian newspaper. Last year's sales from Red Bull Australia products hit almost $250 million, up 16% on the year before. Energy drinks is the fastest growing category of beverages in the country, and Red Bull is the market leader, thanks in large part to a pretty good ad spend.
Okay, moving on to overseas news, and the World Health Organization has warned that China's stringent zero COVID strategy is not sustainable given the highly contagious Omicron variant.
The World Health Organization says it's very important that China shifts away from zero tolerance, not only for now, but also in terms of how the virus will behave in the future. A big part of the problem for China is that their vaccines don't work particularly well, and Beijing doesn't want to import European or North American options. Also, vaccination rates are relatively low in China, but authorities face an unenviable dilemma. US and Chinese researchers have warned that lifting all restrictions in China without boosting vaccination rates and access to treatments would trigger 1.5 million deaths in the next 6 months. Very difficult path to tread.
Yeah, it's a pretty worrying situation. Now, Sean, I mentioned this one at the top of the show. It's a pretty momentous occasion for anyone who's into their technology. The iPod is no more. After 21 years, Apple will no longer manufacture the original music device, which really transformed the way people listen to music.
Do you remember you could download 1,000 songs?
Yeah.
It was great.
Oh, it really was a massive change from either carrying a Discman or a Walkman or something around.
Yeah, instead of attaching something to your arm while you're going for a run, this massive Walkman, to this little small white box that had the circle on it that you could move around. Yeah, look, I mean, the iPhone and then Apple Music more or less replaced the iPod and has done for a decade or so. But Michael, some of us have stayed strong. I have my original iPod, though, to be honest, I haven't played it for years.
Why doesn't that surprise me? If anyone was still going to have their original iPod, it would, of course, be you, Sean. You should just plug it in, charge it up, and see if your musical taste has changed at all from the last 20 years.
I don't know if they've got the plug for it, though. The connection for it's very different to what Apple uses now.
Oh, good point.
Look, it was originally developed to encourage the purchase of Macintosh computers, but it took on a life of its own and pretty much started Apple's trip to becoming the biggest company in the world. Apple has sold about 450 million of them over the past couple of decades, including about 3 million last year. That surprised me that people were still buying iPods.
People are still buying them. There you go. That actually surprises me too. One last one for you, Sean. A US health and technology entrepreneur has raised $20 million to launch an anti-woke investment fund. What's that?
Well, Vivek Ramaswamy made his fortune investing in big pharmaceutical companies, and he wrote a book about wokeism. He's now raised money to invest in companies that make money rather than champion political causes, according to the Telegraph of London. Apparently, he said he'll tell oil companies to be excellent oil companies, coal companies to be excellent coal companies, and solar companies to be excellent solar companies. There's this emergence in investment markets. It's an anti-woke sentiment. It's been an ongoing complaint around the world for a few months now. Some companies really have become almost too purpose-driven, the critics suggest. The highlight for mine was a fund manager earlier this year attacking Unilever, the global food giant, for, in his words, attempting to define the purpose of Hellmann's mayonnaise.
A mission statement for Hellmann's. That is fantastic.
He's got a point.
Now, Sean, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview. We mentioned this at the top of the show. You are speaking with Chris Gibbs from American Rare Earths.
I got a 101 on rare earths, where they are, why they're in such high demand, what the next few years will look like, how difficult they are to process. We also got a bit of a chemistry lesson. I mean, the periodic table just appeared in the middle of this interview somehow in my mind. I don't think I enjoyed that part of it. But look, great interview.
Look, everyone is talking about rare earths at the moment, so this is a really good way to catch up if you feel like you're being left behind. That is up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Thursday, the 12th of May, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And don't forget, if you're a business owner wanting to talk directly to thousands of people interested in finance and business news, then why not get in touch? Head to fearandgreed.com.au and drop us a line. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.